Hello and welcome. This is the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin, Texas. My name is Luther Elmore. We conduct these forums every second and third Sunday of the month here at our church site, 4700 Grover Avenue in Austin, which is in north central Austin. We invite you to come join us, where you can ask your own questions of our presenters. We've been conducting these forums since this church was first incorporated in 1954. And as far as we know, it is the longest continuously operating public affairs forum in the state of Texas. We hold these forums to further the ends of this church, to nourish the mind and spirit, to inform and inspire, and to kick us into social justice and action. For information about these forums, you can go to our church website, austinuu.org. To introduce our speaker today, I'd like to introduce one of our most active environmental members of our church community, Mr. Richard Halpin. Richard.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here, and thank the audience who has turned into this from the radio and from the TV. What's at stake here? Right now, as we meet here today, capitals across the planet are having events to bring attention to the idea and the facts that we're running out of time, that the amount of pollution and the amount of toxic poisons that we are spewing into the atmosphere have reached the tipping point. We already see these happening in the weather events that are happening all over the planet. So all of us have an opportunity to dedicate our lives to what would be global justice. Global justice is to stop the continuing poisoning of our planet by the unmitigated and unparalleled greedy use of fossil fuels. It is the main fulcrum which is tipping the planet into ultimate disaster. There's so many things that we can do. Even little things are important to help save our lives and the lives of all the people of the future. At the very back of the church in the pew on your right as you exit, there are these two books. One is about diet. One is about what you can do in your home. If you have Austin Energy, we have these books. They're back there free for anyone who would like to take those with them. Even more importantly are the tiny steps. And the tiny steps that we have for all of us to encourage each other are the big steps. And we're very fortunate today to have a speaker from our local group of Xtinction Rebellion who I had the pleasure of laying down my body on a walkway for a die-in several weeks ago. And just to get the attention out to folks that we are in precipitous times. So if you will join me in a warm welcome, not as warm as the planet is getting, but a warm and wonderful welcome for Alex, if he'll come forward and speak to us from Extinction Rebellion.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thank you so much for coming. My name's Alex Norton, and welcome to our talk. I'm from Extinction Rebellion Austin. Extinction Rebellion is a global group. It started in London. Right now, 60 capitals are being occupied around the world to basically get our governments to take the correct action on climate change. They're trying to shut down London and New York for 2 to 3 weeks, a fortnight, which is 2 weeks. And this is the Extinction Rebellion symbol. It's simply an hourglass. It is not the Green Lantern symbol because time is precious and it's running out. One thing I want to say about Extinction Rebellion that I'll get into at the end of the talk is that we're a nonviolent movement. We believe in nonviolent civil disobedience, direct action as it's sometimes called, to raise attention to the climate crisis and also get our leaders to act. And we aim to save humanity from extinction. We have demands, which some movements do not have, that I will again get to later. One thing I wanted to bring everyone closer in is to talk about grief. Something that I don't think is talked a lot about in climate change or a lot of in activism is kind of the hopelessness or the death feeling you feel, Thanatos, the Greek god of death. That is kind of trickling in as we see our society steadily decline. And so I want to go over the 5 stages of grief because I believe that when you go through the 5 stages of grief, have people heard of the 5 stages of grief by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross? Then you can take correct action because the last stage of grief, spoiler alert, is acceptance. So I want to go over the science. A lot of people say the science is complex. The science really isn't that complex. There's a lot of graphs, there's a lot of ins and outs, but simply we're killing the planet. But I want to give you a little bit more detail on that, and then I want to talk about the response to it. The first stage of grief is denial. This is simply when you don't want to admit anything that's happening, or you simply, don't want to look at the problem because it's too grave. This is a quote for the radio. "We are the first generation to grow up surrounded by evidence that our attempt to separate ourselves from nature has been a grim failure, proof not of our genius, but our hubris." Okay? And before we get into the science, I'm going to get into the politics, right? Because a lot of people see the situation before we get to the science as a political situation. And the politics does run with the science, and I also think a lot of people don't see that. And how that's converging is a term called eco-fascism, which I'll get into. So in 2015, how many people heard of this? The Ipcc, which is the International Panel on Climate Change, it's this big group of people that get together every year to say they're going to do something on climate change, and then they don't do anything on climate change. They're going to meet in Chile this year. Greta Thunberg. How many people have heard of Greta Thunberg, this teenage? She's going there. She's in the U.S. now. She was in South Dakota, Pine Ridge. I was there 2 weeks ago. And so this is a picture of all the countries agreeing on the Paris Accords, which was to limit emissions by 2 degrees. The bad news is that it's a non-binding agreement. Kyoto, which I believe was 1994. How many people have heard of Kyoto? So Kyoto was the first national agreement. The U.S. didn't even sign on to it. And Canada just backed out after they were charged $30 million. So this one is non-binding. Just following the emissions puts us on a path for 3 degrees of warming. I'll get to the degrees later. And it specifically depends on negative emissions technology. So when people talk about technology, they talk about Bill Gates or whatever getting us to Mars or some big carbon sucking machine. That already means implicitly that we've already emitted enough carbon for catastrophic things to come. It just doesn't happen immediately. That's what they're saying, right? And so I said, on 3 degrees, if everyone did what they're supposed to do. But almost none of the countries are on track to do here. So here I have a map of the world, and the darker colors mean that they're not really keeping track with emissions agreements at all. So we've got the United States, Russia, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. The darker countries are more closely related, the petro-states, petro-governments. And so the only countries that are on track are Morocco and Costa Rica, which is really hard to see, which I don't even think you can really see on this map. Costa Rica actually legalized going carbon neutral by 2030. This is another graph that, again, complicated, but not really complicated. So the Ipcc, this international government that is politically influenced of scientists, they basically have scenarios. So we have, and they call it RCP, Representation Concentration Pathways. So they have, right here is a future projection, and so they have 4 basically timelines we can follow. We can follow the red one, we can follow the yellow one, the gray one, the blue one. Really all you need to know is that the bottom 3 lines are basically garbage. What do I mean? They made them up. We're on the red line. So we're on track for catastrophic climate change. And I was at CERAWeek in Houston, which is the largest oil and gas conference. It had Saudi princes, Mike Pence was there, Cornyn was there, the Alaska senator, I forgot her name, not Murkowski, or maybe it is Murkowski, was there. And they said that they expect global oil production to peak in 2030. And the only reason it's going to peak is because we're going to run out, which is a concept I'm not going to get into, which is called peak oil, which is when we hit the halfway point of a resource globally. And the reason that's such a big deal is because it's too expensive to get the next half. And then, so what's happened since the Paris Agreement? So we've kind of had authoritarian governments across the world. I've got a picture of Trump, I've got a picture of Erdogan, I've got a picture of Modi in India, I've got a picture of Xi Jinping in China, Xi. I've got a picture of MBS in Saudi Arabia, Bolsonaro. Forget his name right now. That's the president of the Philippines in the Duterte? Yes. Boris Johnson, Marie Le Pen, who was not president, but she almost won the last election. She's the only person who was not elected in this picture. Netanyahu and Putin. And so this is something that is not explained a lot, is that, I mentioned the term eco-fascism, is that the right in quotes, is basically locked into denying climate change, in my opinion, because they benefit so much from it. Because the divide and conquer strategy of alienating people, of xenophobia, will be carried out just by climate change. They don't even need to run on the Southern strategy or alienating people or racism anymore. It's just that, oh, these resources need to be divided up some way, and we should think it should be for our group. The next stage of grief is anger. Anger usually follows admitting that your denial is real and that you actually have to confront it. When the last tree has been cut down, the last fish caught, the last river poisoned, only then will we realize that one cannot eat money. Alanus Obawasan. And that introduces the science part of it. Oh, now we're going to the science. This is not the science, but this is a little quote I did. This is a report given to the President of the United States. It simply says the climate changes that may be produced by the increased CO2 content could be deleterious from the point of view of human beings. And it's very hard to see, but the report is dated 1965. It's to Lyndon B. Johnson. This is kind of the simplest graph of climate change that I think explains it to everybody. This is really hard to grapple for your mind, but it's a graph of 400,000 years ago. So in geology, epochs or different time periods have different names. So we have one marked the Eemian. The last 12,000 years has been known as the Holocene. That is the 12,000 years in which civilization developed, in which we had kind of that consistent flat line that you see at the very end of the red graph. They now call our age the Anthropocene. That anthrop means human. So it means humans rule the globe. We are the main changer and mover of the planet. And so as you can see, sea level rise, global temperature, and CO2 concentration correlate pretty well together. The one sad thing to notice, or grimmest thing to notice, is that the sea level rise and global temperature have not caught up with the CO2 concentration. The CO2 concentration has gone off the charts. Because this graph, every tick between like the 0 and the 50 is 1,000 years. And so everything we've done has been in 250. And we've never gone above 280. The group 350, have people heard of the group 350? Denotes its name from trying to get that top graph, the CO2 parts per million, back down to 350. Well, in fact, we've never been above 280, or the Earth stabilizes. The reason the Earth goes up and down, I don't want to explain too much of the science, is volcanoes. Volcanoes release CO2. I think it goes up 1 part per million over 10,000 years, just letting the volcanoes do their thing naturally. And then there's the ecology aspect of it. In science, I remember in 7th grade, I loved science when I was a kid. I loved doing all the Newtonian experiments and everything. There are laws. There are the laws of thermodynamics. There are Newton's laws. Well, this introduces the first but unofficial law of ecology, that everything is connected. If you pull on a string, you end up catching the whole universe, right? The circle of life, right? If you've seen The Lion King, they're trying to teach you something. And so that's really important. And so to go on to everything is connected, all our major environmental forests, ice sheets, coral reefs are connected. And so this graph is a scientific rendering of when they will collapse and how they are connected. For instance, the Arctic is melting. Not many people live in the Arctic, but the Arctic in Antarctica and where Santa Claus lives is melting. And so when the Arctic melts, that brings water warmer downstream and then slows down the thermal conveyor belt where it says thermohaline circulation, and then that dries up the Amazon, and then the Amazon burns some more. And obviously it doesn't hurt that Bolsonaro has been accused of purposely burning the Amazon so they can plant more and grow the animal agriculture industry. The coral reefs are alone in this picture, although I don't believe that's true. It is believed that at 1 degree, which we are at now, 99% of all coral reefs will die, which is their nice way of saying like all coral reefs will die. I've never seen a coral reef, but the Great Barrier Reef, 50 to 75% of it died in the last 3 years. Degrees, I've been saying degrees, I haven't gotten to the degrees yet. So we're at 1 degree. Some people say, I think the official report says 1.1. Really, every tick up means catastrophic, because you don't get a text message when it's too late, right? Because the climate doesn't work that way. It's not negotiable. So it's just that every degree we go up, we get more catastrophic changes, and every degree we go down, we kind of avert some of those changes. So at 1 degree, the coral reefs are dead. At 2 degrees, the Arctic melts and the sea level rise, and what I mean by that is all the ice melts, which is 80 meters. 60 to 80 meters. So people talk about like 2 meters of sea level rise being drastic. All of it melting is pretty catastrophic. And that's already happening, right? It's the degree of it happening. It's just at some point we completely send them to their death. At 3 degrees, it's too hot to live in the tropics, mass migration. That's also what I mean by eco-fascism. So if the immigration crisis is this big of a deal in the country now that people are voting out of this, of keeping the other away, what happens when we need to have a real conversation about about who lives where? Because the whole, Middle East, Central America, Africa is unlivable because it's so hot, and that can't happen. At 4 degrees, the Amazon dies and civilization collapses. The reason civilization collapses is because we can't grow food. We only need 3 things. We need food, we need shelter, we need water. Some people think we need Wi-Fi, but we don't, okay? Right? So that's all that we need, right? We have all these things that abstract that, right? And that's what it's very hard for people to emotionally grapple into climate change. It's very hard to get people to understand that all of this, all these things come from far away. They're made from the third world. They're made in some abstract thing. Because when you go to the store, it's just the shelf, right? It's just Amazon. You just click buy now. And then someone runs 15 miles in some super store to get you that thing in 2 days because you need it so badly. And then 5 to 6 degrees, human extinction, similar to the Permian mass extinction. So there have been 5 great mass extinctions, scientists believe, in the last 2 billion years. Billion with a B. The Earth is believed to be 4.5 billion years old. That's a long time. I am not that old. Let me know if you are. So many people know one mass extinction is when the dinosaurs died. You used to watch that show Littlefoot, or Land Before Time, that's what it's called. Littlefoot's the main character. And that is the easy one. That's the one where the meteor happened, but the 3 mass extinction events have happened by heating events. So the other 2 are cooling events. So that's what happens, is the climate changes drastically and a lot of things die. And so with everything being connected to each other, we need the other animals because the bees pollinate, the insects clean up all our stuff, the animals help the soil out by pooping, and all this stuff that we rely on that we've only been able to get away with our technology. And then what scientists are worried about is something called a feedback loop. A feedback loop can simply be stated as action A happens, and that makes action A happen even stronger, like a vicious feedback loop, kind of like I like working out because I feel better, and then I work out again and I feel even better. And so one easy feedback loop in the environment is Arctic sea ice melting. So the Arctic, the ice acts as a mirror. They call this albedo. Have people heard of albedo? It simply is the measure of reflectance. So a mirror at your house has perfect reflectance, and ice has some reflectance. But that reflects the sunlight up. And so the ice acts as a shield. It takes a lot of the heat for us, reflects that back to space. When it starts to melt, there's less ice to reflect back, and so now there's less area, and so the same heat melts more ice, and thus it keeps degrading and degrading and degrading, and that's why we have a little loop here. And so the reason scientists are so worried about feedback loops is because people have studied Venus. They believe Venus used to have water. Now it's 800 degrees and it rains sulfuric acid. And that is what NASA scientists worry could happen to the planet. And that was only a little bit of the problem, because it always gets worse, right? That's another thing about climate change. If you research it, it's like it gets worse, it gets worse, it gets worse. You got to go party once in a while and have some fun. So I know it's cut off. It's because I did this on Mac. So Earth, so there's just another point of this, which is called resourcism. So even if we could extract from the Earth without any environmental degradation, we are running out of room and we are running out of stuff. We are running out of pure resources. And again, people don't understand that because you go to Walmart, you go to Best Buy, you go to all that stuff. So soil. So soil is the foundation of life. Soil is really important. We are degrading the soil at 1% a year, the UN reports. At that rate, it will be gone in 70 years. It's believed we'll reach peak soil, meaning we reach the actual maximal amount we can use soil in 2030. This is caused by runoff and all the nitrogen fertilizers we use. So like Monsanto, Bayer, all these chemical companies, they destroy the environment with all those chemicals that destroy all the pests. And then they adapt or it degrades the soil over time. Nature reports all fish will be dead by 2049, so we're killing the oceans at an alarming rate. The oceans are huge, right? The ocean, if you look at our planet, we're 70% ocean, right? We are the blue planet. We got water. Water is awesome. What do we look for when we go to the other planets? Water. Elon Musk wants to go to Mars. There's no oxygen, there's no water, there's no shelter. He's a really smart guy. So, and that's the last point. All the insects are going to die in 100 years. Yeah. So waste. I cook for the homeless sometimes, and so we also waste an extraordinary amount of food. 40% of all food is wasted. That means we don't eat it or we throw it away. The average plate travels 1,500 miles. So people try being more sustainable, and this is what I talk about the store model. Before you get into what you buy or what its actual usage is, people don't think about how did that get there, just in general. Forget like what its actual usage is. It may if it came from China, like your iPhone, when you open it up, it says thought of in California, made in China, right? Or something like that. I forgot. It's been a while. And so that it's just traveling all that way, and everything in Walmart's made in China because they make a profit traveling it back. And there's only Walmarts in the U.S., right? We waste as much food as could serve sub-Saharan Africa. So right now we do make enough food to feed everyone on the planet, theoretically, in just pure calories, not in pure like actual vitamins and stuff when they calculate it. But that is going to decrease as we reach peak soil or as we run out of soil. Water. So there are a few reasons why the water is rising. Most people in the climate change or who don't even care know the sea level is rising. The sea level has not risen that much. It's only risen, today, it's only risen 21 centimeters. Now that is a huge amount. It's very difficult to grasp these things. That means the whole sea level, 70% of the Earth's level went up 21 centimeters. That's a huge amount of water. It's not even really hard, even quantifying it, just mind-boggling. And so there are a few other reasons the water level is rising. Most people know the glaciers are melting, that water runs off the land and goes into the sea. That's the easiest reason. One is thermal expansion. So the water's getting warmer because it's absorbing our heat. The water, it's believed the oceans have absorbed 90% of the heat that we produce. It absorbs way more carbon than air. In fact, if we didn't have the oceans, we'd be all dead right now. Well, again, water planet, awesome. Okay, melting glaciers, soil erosion. So as the sea level rises, we have soil erosion. That's, again, another reason we're losing the soil. Immigration crisis. Half of the population on Earth lives within, it's like 30, 50 miles of water, right? We got London, we've got New York. Just think of the biggest cities, LA, we got Miami, we got Houston. Chicago's the third, but it's not near water. It's near the lakes. And then, so immigration crisis, which will be nothing like it is today. That's again why I think it's important to connect the political, because it's like, oh, if just this amount of immigration is causing the fear and panic it is today, what happens when there's more people wanting to immigrate than the whole population of America? What would happen if the Middle East got emptied out, Central America, South America got emptied out, and Africa got emptied out? And the biggest risk of sea level rise that's not really pointed out is basically another Chernobyl, is nuclear power plants melting down. And I got a little Simpsons Peter there, because we have to, there's just 13 nuclear power plants are on the coast, on the East Coast. There's 450 nuclear plants globally. I don't know how much of them are closer to the coast, but they need to be taken care of. And the reason that's a big deal is because unlike anything else, you can't just retreat. You can't just let that drown. You have to deal with it, or else it will be radioactive. It will spew radioactive material, which will kill you for a really, 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 really long time, thousands of years. But it gets worse. Okay? This is a little bit into solutions. Have people heard of the Jevons Paradox? No one? It's not addressed that much. So a lot of people bring up solutions of increasing efficiency. So making things better, having public transportation. public transportation would be helpful, but what increasing efficiency is, or what this paradox is simply saying that as you increase efficiency, you also increase usage. And let me say that. So if you increase efficiency, the price goes down in something, right? Like if you made your iPhone twice as efficient, the price would hopefully go down. But then what the paradox says is you then use it twice as much. So you make up for that energy gain. Does that make sense? This was observed, a lot of people talk about this, but this was observed in the 1850s with steam engines. And it's held true for light bulbs. So, for instance, a light bulb costs like nothing today, so no one cares if they just leave it on all the time. If your light bulb costs $10 an hour to keep on, you would really care to do it. So it's kind of the combination of social behavior, science, and engineering, all combined in one in some simple thing. And then the quote says, "It is confusion of ideas to suppose that the economic use of fuel is equivalent to diminished consumption. The very contrary is true." And then another big monster in the room is consumption. We need to stop consuming, period, not just reusing things or doing things in a different light. And the reason is because a whole way of life is built on the fossil fuels here. I have a graph here of future projection of fossil fuel usage, also past projection. The dotted line is going through 2015 about. Now, if you notice, they project the renewables, hydro, and nuclear getting bigger. But what also you notice is that coal, gas, and oil are also getting bigger. So when people say, they use percentages. They say, oh, this city, Germany, now is 20% renewable, 50% renewable. Yes, that's true, but also its total energy output is increasing. So it's possible to have your renewables increasing and your fossil fuel outputs increasing at the same time with the percentages, because your total energy usage is going up. Does that make sense? So a lot of times it's a con. So we are doing renewables, and obviously they started from nowhere, and now, but as you can see, they don't even project the combined renewables, if you include nuclear, to even match one of the fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas, much less all three combined. Also, the problem's really complex. So I was watching an interview with Al Gore. Al Gore did Inconvenient Truth, and Jaden Smith, who is Will Smith's son of Men in Black. And Jaden Smith just said to Al Gore, so is this problem solved when we all get Teslas? And Al Gore actually had a pretty good response to it. He talked about agriculture and heating and other things. But that's what I wanted to show here, is that the problem is very complex. The problem is has a meat-based component of it, so animal agriculture is very bad on the land. A lot of you see in the agriculture is destroying all forests. Forests are carbon sinks. And cows fart methane, which like Fox News makes fun of, but it's a real problem because we have so many cows and we kill other things just to get more land for more cows. Also transportation, industry, and buildings. And then so this is another thing I just wanted to cement in. Oops, I took that slide out, sorry. And so this is what I'm talking about with understanding the problem. People are not emotionally connecting. And so I think it's really bad, even though I just did it, to come here and say ABC equals MC squared, all these like scientific facts, right? Because then you're like, okay, it's bad. You can go online and read about how bad it is, right? But people aren't emotionally connecting. And that's why I think activism is so important. Because in activism, you come for the fear, but you stay for the love, baby. You stay on the love train, okay? And that's what I want everyone to try to get on, is the love train. And so when thinking about the problem, I think it's also very hard to grasp because there are multiple layers of the problem. There are layers of reality, kind of like the Matrix. And so one of the first layers that people approach is the layer of democracy. And I will define democracy as distributing the needs and gains and losses of society across everyone equally. Not everyone gets to vote or something like that. And so this layer is where a lot of people are, because this creates a lot of the real life intangible problems that you see. Okay, patriarchy, racism, economic inequality, a lot of, Middle East foreign wars, and other problems. The next layer is climate change. So a harsh reality is that none of our systems are made to deal with climate change. The democracy layer, even like our government, the Constitution as it is, cannot handle climate change. Why? Just because of the time component. right? So we don't have 2 years to like elect all these people, say, oh, this is their climate agenda, them not do what they should do or do it enough, and then come back and decide it in two more years, right? The climate doesn't work like that. It's not negotiating. It doesn't sit down with us. It doesn't sign a document. The other layer is resourcism, I call it. That's not an actual word, but a lawyer I met called it that. And so that's the fact that nature and everything around us is resources. Sometimes we treat each other as resources. How can I climb up the ladder a bit more? Who can I meet? Who can I do? What can I do? What can you do for me, right? And so that is another huge problem that our society can do. And so like the legal system is very difficult to deal with because the legal system usually sees things as resources, sees nature as resources. So when you bring a case, it's either group A gets it or group B gets it. Usually the group with more money gets it, which is the corporations. And the other layer is connection with nature, that we have lost a connection with nature. I once asked an activist, like, what would you want to see happen with your society? And he said, I want a society in which people swim for the salmon to come home every year, right? Like that's more or less what our society should look like. Like we should be, doing jumping jacks with the trees. I don't know. I'm not too connected with nature too. I did do Boy Scouts though, right? Because we just sit at our electronic hallucinations all day, right? And we don't connect with each other. And we lost our connection with nature. The third stage of grief is bargaining. Bargaining is when you start to think of things like, what if Exxon didn't exist? What if Al Gore won the 2000 election? What if, Trump wasn't president? And the quote is, "It is a strange thing that the human species can only go 3 days without water and 3 weeks without food before the body dies, yet so many people can go years hanging on to pain and feeling emotionally dead inside." Shannon L. Alder. And so this is a little graph I drew of 3 possible doors we can do. So we have 3 doors here. And 2 are right next to each other because they're very similar. And then the third door is a much lower probability, but is the door I will talk about the most. Okay, so door number 1, which is the red door on the left, is we grind earth into dust, which we already don't have to do anything for that. That's an easy door. It means don't do anything, go home, sleep, have fun, or party while the world ends. And I think like understanding climate change for me was a huge wake-up call into like what is life about? What do we do with a terminal diagnosis? Like what should we really do on our trek from the womb to the tomb? The second door, oh, it didn't show the second, oh, no, the second door is we go down the eco-fascist hellhole. So that's basically when, instead of just basically letting society going on as normal, we go in the direction of less democracy. We go in the direction of losing everything. So as the climate gets worse, the government will use these disasters to strip away more of our rights, because the government's going to even take a bigger role in, maintaining the border, stopping these floods, or defending and protecting the rich. Okay, and so that again is ecofascism, and this is my Photoshop picture of a fire and a swastika in a hole, as in a fascist hellhole. Okay, but the third door, solution time. I got to give you guys a little bit of hope, right? Just a little bit. Sugar makes the medicine go down, as Mary Poppins said. Is that, we come together and figure out, like, what is our purpose in life? And for me, Extinction Rebellion activism, the purpose of life is to stop evil when it confronts you. Not to win, not for a goal, not for money, not for love, not for sex, not for parties or whatever. Just to say, hey, I confronted a bad thing over there and I tried my best. As the great radical priest Daniel Berrigan said, you must believe that the good draws to it the good, even if all empirical evidence says otherwise. And so this is a very famous picture, just Tiananmen Square. It's believed he was the 11th man killed that day. Well, they don't know who it was. And he simply has his groceries, believed to be a he, and just over my dead body. I just love that. I was going to play a clip of The Matrix, but I couldn't get it working, so we won't do that. And so this is a comic. It's a man and a doctor. Here's your problem. It looks like you're paying attention to what's going on. Ha 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 ha. Okay. And so conclusion is that this current civilization is finished. So like capitalism, the whole economic model is done. And the reason it's done is because it's killing itself. Because you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. We can't do this to the planet. We have finite resources and we need to account for that. And that's what like all the great critics of capitalism have always said is like, that's your problem. You're kind of like this huge, it's kind of like The Incredibles. So people seen the movie Incredibles, at the very end they're fighting this huge robot and Mr. Incredible has this vision. He's like, the only thing big enough to kill itself is itself. And so he takes his arm and kills the robot with its own arm. Yeah, I see, no one's seen the video, but no one's seen the movie, you don't need to see it. But they kill it with itself. They kill this huge machine with itself. And so like that's like capitalism. Like it's undermining itself. That's what all the great critics say. The present institutions will not take action. I think a lot of them are incapable of taking action, or any of the action that they can is pretty marginal. And then the past model of activism has failed to solve the problem. So we've had, a lot of people have tried, and I totally don't blame anyone individually. People have really tried. People in Sierra Club, people in 350, people in a lot of the NGOs, they've really tried to solve the problem, and that's awesome. But it hasn't worked. Fourth stage of grief is depression. Depression is when you've kind of accepted the loss that you are facing. And here's the quote: "There are wounds that never show on the body that are deeper and more hurtful than anything that bleeds." Lowell K. Hamilton. Okay? So this is what I mean by a moral obligation to act, okay? You know, death is certain, but living is inevitable. And that's what I mean about doing activism, is that you find a purpose, you find a reason to live. That Matrix clip I was going to show it shows the main character Neo, who is the one, and he's getting beat up, and he's asked, why do you do it? Why do you fight me? Because he's fighting this impossible foe he's going to lose, and he simply says, because I choose to. Because I choose to. And that's what life's about, is finding your meaning no matter what the outcome, right? That gives you a purpose. When I was really young, I used to watch Michael Jordan. Used to watch Michael Jordan play basketball, and the look on his eyes, just possessed. It's kind of like the jewel thief. The jewel thief in those movies, when he's done all the jobs, he's stolen all the jewels, he's done all the quests, he's sitting there in his mansion, he's never caught, and someone comes to him and says, one more job, and he knows he shouldn't do it, but he takes it because that's the only time he ever felt alive. And I'm not saying to steal anything, but that's what life is about, is like feeling alive and finding your purpose. And I believe we have a moral obligation to act, right? We have a moral obligation to become more human. And that's what I think a lot of our journeys are, but we're too entranced by electronic hallucinations, a lot of things that are short-term gain for long-term loss. And so Extinction Rebellion has 4 demands. And we're getting into what we're going to do now, sorry. I should have said that. And so the first thing is the government must tell the truth about the climate and wider ecological emergency. The second is the government must enact legally binding policy measures to reduce carbon emissions to net zero by 2025. Net zero is a very important thing. So net zero means that you're sucking up as much CO2 as you're emitting. So that doesn't mean zero promptly. So net versus perfect zero is a huge difference in the science. A citizens' assembly. So this is the most important demand, in my opinion. Some people disagree with me. Is that we basically want to end the current governmental regime of capitalist democracies in the world by having a citizens' assembly, which means we have a group of people, could be randomly selected, and it could be based on population, based on gender, based on race, resembling the population, and have them come decide, hear experts, and decide what should we do on the climate decision. So it's about getting the power structure and the politicians out of the way to properly do something. And the fourth demand, which is only in the US, England did not adapt it, is, again, it's off the screen, sorry about that. We demand a just transition that prioritizes the most vulnerable people and indigenous sovereignty, establishes reparations and remediation led by and for Black people, indigenous people, people of color, and poor communities for years of environmental injustice. And I hope it also does our gay sisters and brothers and the transgender people as well. Is it gonna go? And so, to accomplish these demands, the 12 people who founded this group, they went and studied nonviolent civil disobedience. Now, I was amazed that they studied rebellions. They studied big political changes that have happened. And there actually is a whole field of this. You can go to college and study this. And the main architect of this study is a guy named Gene Sharp. He's written a lot of books by it. He died 2 years ago. He started the Albert Einstein Institute, I believe. And he was nominated for a Nobel Prize. And he wrote all about nonviolent direct action. And he studied movements and saw that nonviolent movements succeed twice as likely as violent movements. And the reason is that violent movements succeed, but a lot of times they result in fascism. They result in authoritarianism. And the reason is because if you take power with violence, then you institute violence into your new society. So basically you have civil wars. You have number 2 trying to take out number 1, number 3 trying to take out number 1 and number 2. Make sense? Violence occurs. And the other thing that I really like about Extinction Rebellion that I'm trying to impart to you guys is emotion, right? Trying to connect people emotionally. When you watch Donald Trump, right, what does he viscerally connect with you? He connects with you emotionally. Like within 12 seconds, you know if you hate him or you love him, right? Because he's connecting with you emotionally, right? The worst thing you can be is boring, right? So I think like fear can get people to act. Hope and love can get people to act as well. But when you're boring, when you're just sitting there saying 2.1 gigawatts so we can, go back in time, what's that Back to the Future quote? That doesn't inspire people, and inspiring people emotionally. And that's why I think with climate change, a lot of people talk about the children, they talk about the polar bears, they talk about the bees, but they forgot one thing. They forgot you. You need to tap within yourself and have the thought of what you are going to do. The inescapable reality of being born between urine and feces, of what are you going to do from mother's womb to your tomb. Okay? And the next thing is, I know, good quote, right? So, they studied actual movements that have happened. So 2 big, really famous people, Gandhi and Martin Luther King, have very famous movements studied after them and why they worked, and they were both nonviolence. And so Gandhi has a very famous quote. It's in first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And so that is the way I'm going to present our theory of change. Every movement has a theory of change, and there's huge debates within that. It said, when philosophy dies, action begins. So first they ignore you. They've been ignoring us for 40 years. That's considered the contemporary environmental movement. The environmental movement was believed to be started when Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring in 1963, I want to say, 1962. She has a chapter on Barron Springs, I believe. She died 2 years later. It's believed she died from the pesticides that she was writing about. So first they ignore you. They ignored Al Gore. He did Inconvenient Truth. There is video of Al Gore testifying or getting people to testify on climate change in 1975 on YouTube when he was a congressman. MLK, that's why they came together in the 50s. MLK met Rosa Parks and they did the Montgomery bus boycotts because they realized after Reconstruction, they still had not gained any rights and they had to do something more. Okay, then they laugh at you. Oh, sorry, about the climate movement. So we finally, I think, just got out of the first they ignore you stage. So that's a big thing. And we're in this stage. So first they laugh at you. And do you know these 2 people? So if you ever watch Fox News, they talk about environmental policy or laugh at it a lot. I was watching this clip of Laura Ingraham. She had like a steak and a straw and like a cigarette on a table, and she said like these are the left's worst enemies or something. And so now they're laughing at us because we're actually accounting for change that we're actually asking for what is needed, like serious responses to this action. And that's also something very hard for people to grasp is the time component, because the more we procrastinate, the more severe action we need to do. That's why people don't understand, like, oh, is it still like 2008 when we get Teslas or we just plant differently or there's buses everywhere? That's all gone. Why? Because you wasted 10 years. Right? You had the chance to do that. You had the chance to do the easy things, and you missed your opportunity. And no other issue kind of works like that. Like the climate, because the climate's going to get worse for a long time no matter what, right? Like it's already, if you're in the third world, complete train wreck. And the point of the laughing at you stage is the Overton Window. Have people heard of the Overton Window? The Overton Window is the window or the boundaries of conversation you can have with someone. So, for instance, a huge shifter of the Overton Window was the Occupy movement. Do people remember the Occupy movement? That was at the start of this decade when Obama was president. And so they have this concept that is now talked a lot, Bernie Sanders says it a lot, called the 99%. So they talked a lot about wealth inequality, right? The fact that 3 people now have as much wealth as the bottom half of the population. But they shift the Overton Window, and so everyone uses these phrases. And so that's where Occupy got to. And the third phase is where Occupy where they got to, but they got confronted at. Then they fight you. So When they fight you is when it can get all pear-shaped, when you can lose a lot. So that's when I talked about feedback loops in the climate. We have, as Gene Sharp talks about, feedback loops in civil rights. So he calls it political jujitsu, or the backfiring effect. So what we do when they fight us is we employ massive, which means we need a lot of people, not too much, just 3.5% of the population. That comes from studies, that's why I say that. Sustained. This is important. It needs to be sustained because you're not disrupting anyone. You need to disrupt people. What's the problem with the march? It's all great. You hand out flyers, you give the speeches. It doesn't stop anything. And the whole global economy needs to be stopped. Why? Because it's frying the planet. It needs to be nonviolent. And this gets back to the political jujitsu. The reason it needs to be nonviolent is so you bring more people in. Because when people see kids, children, grandmothers, or usually non-white people, getting hurt, or anyone in general, it inspires everyone else to come in. Because they're saying, hey, that's my daughter. I'm coming down there. Okay? I'm coming down there to also get in this, because I'm not going to let you do that to my kids. It also needs to be fun. And I added that because the literature shows that, is because while you're doing a rebellion, you need to construct your new society. And if anyone is interested in Extinction Rebellion after this, come talk to me. But also, we have regenerative culture. We have other groups that help us, that also just about constructing a new society. You don't need to get arrested. You don't need to lay down the streets. You don't need to make flyers. You don't need to run the social media, although you can do that too. And so that is the backfiring effect, is that them being nonviolent to a violent person inspires more people to come in, and that's your feedback loop. And that's sort of your win condition or checkmate, is more people coming into the movement than the enemy can take out, if that makes sense. And so the plan. I'm trying to give this talk as much as possible. If you want to give this talk in your community or want me to come and give this talk in the community, I have a much longer version that I took out for this. That's it's like 20 more slides. And then right now, people are rebelling all across capital cities everywhere. The rebellion started October 7th. Austin, our group is a little bit smaller, so we decided not to have a rebellion this week or the next week. And then try to have as many rebellions as needed as possible. So last time London did theirs in April, they got the government to enact a climate emergency, and now they're asking what are they actually going to do about it. And so in Extinction Rebellion, we're a nonviolent group, but we believe in getting people arrested, because getting people arrested means you caused a good disruption, not always the correct disruption. So again, you don't need to get arrested, but again, for everyone who's arrested, there's like 20 other people supporting others. It's just like war. Like in war, it's only like 2 to 5% of the people actually firing a gun, but behind them is medics. Behind them is people just transporting everything, people getting oil, people, even though we want to stop that, but, right? There's, everyone sits on the shoulders of giants. I believe that's a Newton quote. And so, like I just said, we embrace everyone. So you can support us, you can be like a core coordinator, which I guess I am. You can be an active organizer, you can come to one meeting every year, you can be an active participant, you can just help us. So like if you have a meeting place you want to offer us, we would love it. If you know how to draw and just want to draw pictures, we would love it. If you want to, if you're really good at one thing, one niche thing, I would love it to talk to you. Tech, media, planting, permaculture, anything. And so, and again, this is what we're a holacracy, and when people ask what a holacracy means, it's kind of tough, but it's kind of like if we want to enable participation with everyone. And so like if people have an idea, we want to embrace it and hear it, and if you can get a few people to go do it, and no one else is really against it, you can go do it. And again, like I said, like emotionally connecting with it and finding a purpose in life. And I think I don't want to be dogmatic and say like this group is everything, and because I want to tell you the truth, right? In the sixth mass extinction, only love remains. And so why getting involved is that, I don't know if we're the only game in town, but we're really committed to radical change. I think inaction is morally indefensible because this is all I think about. Like something that really depressed me about climate change was that was not that I read the science and got really depressed, but was just seeing reality or seeing real life grind away. Like after you leave this church, right? Oh, you're going to go back in your car? Like just watching, the oil and everything else just get worse and worse, and not even everyone notice that society's just grinding away. Because I've watched all my grandparents die, and when you're in a hospice situation, it can be very uplifting to if everyone is in the acceptance stage, which is everyone, you may sit down and have nice talks and talk about things you regretted or enjoyed your life in. But when someone's denying it, when you get friction, that's when it can get really hairy. And so that's like when I see like all of the rest of society just grinding itself into dust. Chance to meet amazing people. I've made the best friends through Extinction Rebellion. I'll be your best friend if anyone doesn't have a best friend, seriously. So it's a chance to meet amazing people, and I think inaction is morally indefensible. Now it brings us to the last stage of grief, which is acceptance. Quote is, when you experience loss, people say you'll move through the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. What they don't tell you is that you'll cycle through them all every day. And that's true with the 5 stages of grief, is that you go through them intermittently. So it's not A, B stage. It's not like steps. That makes sense. Thank you all for going, and I just hope everyone thinks about what they're called to do in life and what they find a purpose in what they do. I'm not a religious minister, but I think, we all have a terminal disease transmitted at birth. Life is not guaranteed forever, but as Kierkegaard said, to deny one's self-love is the greatest denial of all. And so I hope everyone thinks about that. And sorry, the full quote is not there. We're all going to die, all of us. What a circus. That alone should make us love each other, but it doesn't. We are terrorized and flattened by trivialities. I forgot the last part. And thank you, guys.
Thank you, Alex Norton. We have about 10 minutes left, and if you have some questions of our presenter, then please hold up your hand. I'll come so you can ask your question.
Can you share what you talked about in terms of the solution, how those solutions are actually making an impact in terms of reversing all of the negatives that you shared with us today?
Gotcha, good question. So in terms of hope or what should be done, I'm not going to guarantee you any of the solutions would work. I'm just saying that we have a moral obligation to do what is right, even if it doesn't work. But like getting carbon emission, we need to get off fossil fuels, right? And that requires a complete changing of our political and economic structure. I do think Extinction Rebellion is not about solutions, and I personally don't like that. This is my personal view, because some of the solutions are really hard to talk about. Like, for instance, we get all our medicine from airplanes. Or from heart medicine comes from the Amazon. So like cutting off transportation is not, the hardest thing wouldn't be your transportation, it'd be all the stuff you get transportation. So that's a really hard pill to swallow. And so instead of like, hey, let's actively talk about this, we're just gonna say, we will talk about this when we get power, which is really hard to do in the forefront. So in terms of solutions, there are some very uncomfortable things to talk about, like, do we have overpopulation or not? Or how do we do, if we think we are, what do we do about it? So I don't know, a little bit of cop out in the question. Yeah?
Thank you so much for being here, and we really appreciate the message that you shared with us today. Would you share with people here in the audience and over the radio and TV how they can connect to Extinction Rebellion and how to make connections and go further with this?
Thank you, Richard. Please come and see me after this. You can email us at xraustin@protonmail.com. You can check out our Facebook, Extinction Rebellion ATX. You can message Twitter. I run the Twitter, which is @xraustin. And that's it for now. We do have a website. I can't think of the URL at the top of my head. Sorry about that. But you can also check out rebellion.earth, and if you type in Austin, that is the main XR website. That will bring you to us.
My name is Chris, and I think you need to incorporate into your presentation that amelioration is not going to help us anymore. We actually have to make a fundamental change. I mean, we're entering an alien world probably within a couple of generations, meaning that our infrastructure, our housing, our transportation, everything that we've used for the last 10,000 years will be inappropriate.
I agree. I mean, I agree. Like, our society has to change at such a level, it's mind-boggling. Like, it's not even, words do not describe what we need to do. Like, it's not even, it's very hard to see if solutions even exist, other than just living at a lower standard. That's why, like, the easiest solution is to stop consuming, lower our consumption, because that will get the fossil fuels right. That will hopefully allow us more time to fortify our walls or our livelihoods so we can survive longer.
A little optimism. We have 8 bills in the Congress to put a price on carbon. People said that would never happen in the United States. But because of activists around the world and around the United States, we now have 8 bills in Congress to put a price on carbon. And even the International Monetary Fund this last week said a price on carbon is our only hope to really reduce the damages to the planet. So I think the fact that people are getting politically active can give us some hope.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm for all points of activism. I guess my general point and the general point of XR is, like, it's very difficult to get the legislation we need, because if the carbon tax, for instance, isn't good enough, then we have to do it. We have to go back into the political system, and it's just slow. It's just very good at slowing things down.
We just have a
If
couple of
not
minutes.
deep.
We just have a couple of minutes left. Probably time for one question.
So I'm interested about managing the change as best we can. So, for instance, a retreat, a managed retreat from the coast, that kind of thing, and other things like that. People going to local farming and so on and so forth. Any of that kind of management.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, we'll need huge management. I mean, the land we're losing, because we're not losing a lot of land. Like, if you go online and look at a graph of 80 meters sea level rise globally, there's still a lot of land. It's not like we're losing even like 20% of our land. It's just that all our stuff, we kind of like water. Like, our civilizations grew up on the Nile and all the oceans. So there's just a lot of stuff, New York, and managing retreats is going to be really important. I think, a lot of people ask the question, I should have said this in the talk, climate change is happening, where do I go? Do I go to Africa? Do I go to Australia? That's a big thing, Australia. They're building these, fortified bunkers in Australia for rich people. But I know the answer. I've done a lot of research on it, and you go to the airport, you buy a one-way ticket to your heart. You go to where the compassion is, you go to where love is, you go to where friendship is. Those are the things the climate can't change.
Alex Norton of Extinction Rebellion, thank you for giving us your time and your energy and the work you're doing for John. Thank you very much.